We're just going to allow everyone a few moments to finish arriving into our session. So we welcome you to Is This the New Normal? Exploring the effectiveness of remote education for students and families. Thank you so much for your attendance. We will plan to begin our session in about 1 minute.
Dr. Wallace, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Good morning, Dr. Wolfork Barnes.
Good morning. I apologize to everyone. I am having some computer problems, so I don't know if it's just me. But when you're ready to start, go ahead. I will be paying attention to the chat, and if there are any questions, I will. We won't wait until the end. I'll just take the opportunity to pose those questions throughout.
Oh, that'll be great. And what I'll do, everyone, if it's okay with you, um, we will, when we take those opportunities to um, stop and talk, I will pull down the screen share so that we can actually see each other a little bit, if that's okay. But we just wanted to make sure everyone knew they were in the correct room. So we'll just go ahead and begin now. Again, my name is Dr. Luchara Wallace, and I have the tremendous honor and fortune of serving as the director of the Lewis Walker Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnic Relations at Western Michigan University. And we welcome you to our presentation, Is This the New Normal? Exploring the effectiveness of remote education for students and families. Today, we're going to be focusing on sharing information related to our WIRE youth development programs. And so I have a tremendous team of partners who have executed excellently our WIRE Summer Science and Math Camp and Saturday Academies, both in person and now wireless or wirelessly. So we're so excited. So I want to welcome my co-presenters, Dr. Gus Calbert, Ms. Denisha Griffey, Mr. Sean Bottoms, and Mr. Lazarius Miller. So we're just going to go ahead and get started today. So again, let me put some names and faces with who we are and what we do. As many of you may know, Dr. Lewis Walker is the first African American tenured faculty member at WMU. He is a faculty emeriti in in sociology, and he is the namesake for the Lewis Walker Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnic Relations. I do serve as the director. Dr. Calbert is our program coordinator, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from each of us as our presentation progresses. Shamante Dickerson is our administrative assistant senior, and Talanda Ali is our GA, who's been tremendously wonderful in helping us to coordinate a lot of the on the ground stuff for our programs. Lazarius Miller is our research and evaluation assistant. We're so fortunate to have him. Miss Denisha Griffey is one of our instructors. And I tell you, without Denisha and without Jashawn Bottoms, we would not make this happen. We would not have been able to make this happen. We're so grateful for all of the time and energy and effort that they have put into our programming and into our youth. And it's because of their creativity and willingness to pivot during some very interesting times that we've been able to progress. So here we go. The first question that we were presented with back on March 12th, when we heard the governor's executive order come out, the question became to be or not to be. And we wanted to know, does remote education meet the needs of students and families in the era of COVID-19? So in our session today, we're seeking to explore the effectiveness of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. And we are going to look at it from the perspectives of students, families, and instructors. So very generally, we're going to provide an introduction and goals of our WIRE Youth Development programs. We are going to look at our transition from wired to wireless. We are going to specifically share with you our wireless curriculum and some of the at-home examples of some of the at-home experiments that we used. We are going to focus on how we were able to leverage technology to make this work. We're going to address some of those issues that everyone has been talking about right now as it relates to sustaining student engagement. And we're also going to look specifically at our data and results. Thank you so very much, Mr. Miller, for making sure that we've got data and results to share. And then we wish to also share some of our next steps. And now I'm going to turn our presentation over to Dr. Gus Calbert. Dr. Gus?
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Oops, I'm sorry. There you go.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace, and to the co-presenters. I look forward to us sharing as always. And again, thank you for the opportunity to work with you. It's interesting, Doc, as I reflect on, we originally created the Wire Youth Development Program to get our students to move, to get them from in front of the television and in front of the computer screen to the gymnasium where we could teach them about playing soccer, playing basketball, playing volleyball, running track, how to work as a team and how to move together. And we could measure the growth and see if it made a difference in their attitudes and work development and so forth. Well, as you mentioned earlier, once COVID-19 came along, it was a shift to, okay, how do we still keep students engaged in learning and in school and at the same time measure their growth academically? Well, fortunately for us, over the last probably 10 years, we had developed a reputation in Kalamazoo County. So we brought students in from Kalamazoo, from Comstock, from Parchman, from Galesburg, Augusta, from Portage, from Matawan. We had students even travel down from Benton Harbor. And they enjoyed participating in our program. So when we went to the math and science camp, we were able to pull on those students, and that made a huge difference. We started off obviously with the summer, and our goal at that point was, again, how do we close the achievement gap between our students? How do we get more students ready for algebra, geometry, and high school, and getting ready for college with taking calculus, which means that you need geometry in the 9th grade. So that was one of our primary goals. The other was to make sure that our students weren't afraid of taking math and taking science. It didn't scare them. So the introduction for the Saturday Academy and introduction for the Summer Academy came out of that mindset. How do we close the achievement gap? Because our students were not doing well algebraically and thinking in terms of mental math and in problem solving. So our very creative teachers came up with some ways to say we need to create some units that we can make portable that will help us get to the students. And that's what we began to do. So with that in mind, we transitioned from working with students 5 weeks in the summer from 9 to 1 and plus field trips to working with students over the internet and calling them during the week and trying to adjust their schedules and adjust our schedules to working around their school schedules and working around their family schedules. So that's been part of the challenge to what we've been doing. Again, just from the perspective of having the support of parents and the support of kids, yes, we've been doing a good job at that. Parents love the program. And we've been fortunate in that we've been able to connect the two. We carried over from the summer until the Saturday Academy, which meets bi-weekly. And now we're looking at the next phase. How do we transition to the next phase by engaging our WIRE students? So again, we're hoping that, as you see, that they have developed a deeper understanding of math. They're not afraid of the concepts. They're not afraid of connecting, which has been a plus. We're also also very confident that our students are enjoying working together. Even though they are working on computers, they get in the chat room and talk to each other, and they compete to see who's able to do the most in the math and the most in the science. So from that standpoint, it works.
Mom, could you please turn that down? Thank you so much, Dr. Gus. I believe our next transition is going to be to Ms. Griffey.
Hello, as Mr. Gus mentioned, we went from being wired to wireless. And this past summer, that is exactly what our challenge was. We went from being in the classroom with the students 4 days a week and on Fridays taking field trips to doing it wireless by giving them information and within packets and lab mails and meeting with them once a week. So this past summer, we explored food science and space. And also with that, we wanted to introduce students to famous African Americans within those fields that helped shape those fields. And so this past summer, we looked at 2 people. We looked at George Washington Carver and we looked at Katherine Johnson with space. And to start off this summer, we gave them a welcome newsletter to kind of give them an overview of what we will be doing and give them a little peek into what we were doing. So what we would do, we incorporate at least 2 hands-on activities throughout the week. When one of them, we would do a live session, and we also did math activities through the week. We used math handouts that we created in a packet that we dropped off, and we also used Imagine Math. So through science, history, and art, we worked on the standards that are set forth. And so we looked at what the Earth and human activity, we looked at growth and development, and we looked into engineering design, because that's all part of the core curriculum for students learning. And I'm not sure if it was mentioned previous, but we worked with students from 3rd grade to 8th grade. So we had 2 different dynamics. And normally when we were in Wired, we divided those groups out. And so Ms. Bobs and I would have split between the elementary students versus the middle school students. But this year we had a challenge is that we put them all together. So we developed activities where we could create things together. So we looked at several outcomes. Applying the scientific method, because when you're looking at science, and we had a lot of students who thought that science was hard, they didn't like it, they didn't understand it, but we made it fun. But we also wanted to incorporate using the scientific method, being able to document that scientific work, sharing their learning experience with others, and representing that information, data, and charts and graphs. And with that, they were able to practice analytical techniques such as analyzing experiments data, and with the hope that they would show more interest in STEM fields and careers. So as I mentioned before, we looked at 2 scientists in the field. We looked at George Washington Carver, who was a botanist, and then we also looked at Katherine Johnson, who was a mathematician, because we are the science and math summer program. We wanted to touch on both of those. So the different topics we touched on were food science, agriculture, botany, space with NASA, and package engineering design. And so several experiments we had come after that. We divided our 5-week program into 2 weeks with each scientist, and then 1 week to prepare for a showcase, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the first 2 weeks, we looked at George Washington Carver, and we did experiments where we built our urban garden, because one thing that George Washington Carver did a lot, he's known for his peanuts, but we wanted students to learn how to do different things with plants. So we created buckets. We gave them all the materials they needed and a plant, and they created their own urban garden. And so, and from there, we also did experiments of growing potatoes, a tomato test. They designed a package, because with food, and when you talk about food science, you have to go through the engineering aspect of designing the package to sell that food. And they also use those foods and nature. And in this case, we use spices, and they created paints with the spices so they could do pictures. With Katherine Johnson, which was the second half of the summer, we tracked the moon phases. We designed and built rockets. We looked at water filtration, because we still wanted to look on the same trend of food science and how they prepared food in space. And then after we created rockets, they had the opportunity to launch rockets if they wanted to. And so the whole goal was to tie the two things together, explore different careers, and kind of bridge that gap with their understanding, to let them know that science is fun. It's not just reading the material in the book, that it can be hands-on. And so we provided them with everything they needed for the summer. So what we have here is just some different examples of the experiments that the students did. Some of them are some that I did with the students that I videotaped or took pictures as we were doing them as a group lesson. And then the other half of them are ones that the students submitted to us. So as you can see, you got a couple students in the picture when they did the moon phases, they created a moon calendar and they were showing off their moon calendar. So going from left to right, we did the potato experiment. So we had a sweet potato to see how it grow. We tried the sweet potato and white potato to see what will happen. In science, you're always going to have something that might not go as planned. And what we learned this summer was that the white potato wasn't so keen on growing the way we wanted it properly, but the sweet potato did, and it produced the leaves and everything else. We did fun with paints where we took spices, 4 different spices, and then to use them as colors, and then we painted different plants or anything else that you had around you that you wanted to plant. We did water filtrations in space, so we provided them with water bottles, sand, gravel, the dirt that they needed. In this video, you see different household products that you can use to filter dirty water to make it clean. And so what they did, we mixed the dirt up in the water to get it all muddy or whatever, and then they poured it into the filtration device to see how clean they could get it. Then we did the astronaut landing with NASA in space. And so they got to imitate what the person would be in space, and then you have the cup and you're making it as a your rocket landing on the moon. And then you had the little marshmallows that represent the people and how they would float down to the surface of the moon. And so that was real interesting. A couple of students submitted their photos for that. And then of course the urban garden where we grew tomatoes and hot peppers. And I will turn this over to Jashawn.
Okay, so for our math, we've not only focused on operations and algebraic thinking, learning numbers, place value, the number system, expressions, and equations. So those math concepts, but we also wanted to connect those math concepts to science, so the science that Ms. Griffey just covered, but also the learner's world. So when it comes to career, jobs they may get, things, their everyday life, and how that math could be important. So some of the things we wanted students to leave knowing is being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide whole numbers between 1 and 1,000, both shorthand, using estimation, fast techniques, but also developing those mental math skills for those times tables up to 10 times 10, 12 times 12, and things like that. We also wanted to look at adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. And in doing that, we learned about factors and multiples and how that can sometimes help us solve those hard fraction problems a little easier. And a lot of that had to do, especially with the mental math, is addressing that confidence piece with the students, because when you go in with those skills of just like the basic, adding, subtracting, when it comes to hard problem solving, you're a little more confident and willing to address it. Also understanding place value, expressions and equations, so starting to introduce letters into math problems, and then explaining that connection between math, science, and to various careers. So how do these different scientists use math on a daily basis? How do they teach it to their students? And why is it even important? And then we also, with all of that, the learning outcome would be that they could tackle future problems, whether it be their next grade up or when they actually go in the classroom with more confidence. So our 3 main topics were algebraic expression, problem solving, and number theory. So we developed different activities and projects that focused on rounding, using the 4 operations. We used story problems, and when we did the story problems, we tried to make story problems related to the experiments that we came up with. So if we, for example, did a tomato taste test experiment, an activity would be to actually interpret the data from the class and see how well the class liked the tomatoes. We did story problems, the data interpretation, what I just mentioned, and then also number theory. So again, those factors, multiples, and then time challenges. So that we had every week. The fraction time challenges for our middle school, and then multiplication and division for our elementary students, and they practice doing those just to get faster again with that mental math. So here's an example of one of the worksheets towards the bottom left. And then at the top, you'll see the Imagine Math symbol. So that allowed for a more individualized approach to learning. All the students started with a benchmark. The benchmark placed them in a grade, or kind of like told them their strengths and weaknesses, and then developed lessons for them that they could follow that were included games and things like that that could improve their score and get them to where they need to be. And then we as instructors could track that and kind of develop activities based on what we saw that they needed help with. When it comes to leveraging technology, we had Ms. Griffey do this great website, a WIRE website, just for our students and the WIRE team, but also the parents. And then on this website, we were able to post our calendar of our live sessions, our newsletters, our activities, videos, Imagine Math links, bios of the the teachers, instructors, the WIRE team, parent information. It was really just an all-in-one source for the students. We also had Imagine Math, again, a lot for that individual approach. We had Reach, which allowed us to reach out to our parents and get involved with them and keep them updated on our live sessions. And again, we used a lot of videos and online approach, especially during online learning with the chats. And then our live chats, you can see at the bottom right, where we have a screenshot of some of our students showing off some of their Urban Garden products and things like that. And then I will turn it back to Ms. Griffey to talk about how we
So this past summer, we looked at two things: the synchronous versus asynchronous instruction. And one thing with that, so we had students that chose to do the activities on their own. So which was the asynchronous group. So we provided them with everything they needed, with the instruction they needed, the materials they needed. And so they went through and did the experiment. A couple slides back, I showed a couple of students who showed off their work. They were a part of our asynchronous group. So they would just show us, upload pictures every once in a while, and they did it at their own pace because the summer program was designed where they can do it at their own pace. In addition to that, we had the synchronous group where the students who actually follow along with us as instructors. And so once a week, they would log in with us for about an hour, and we would go through experiments together as a group. If they did anything on their own, they would show us those experiments. If they had any questions about those experiments, we talked about them. We also spent that time to talk about the two scientists that we discussed that summer, and then just any other questions they had. A lot of times it was a chance for them to see each other because a lot of them hadn't seen each other since they left school in March. So they would get on the chat, they would joke and play, they would laugh because they were interacting with people that they haven't seen. And as Mr. Gus mentioned earlier on, they utilized the chat at during that time to communicate with each other. And they also use that chat to communicate with us. So if questions posed as we were going through the lessons, we were able to come back and answer those, and everyone saw those questions. So that way, if another student had that same question, we were able to touch on it, and they wouldn't be afraid to ask, because we were trying to create an environment that they were comfortable in and wasn't afraid to ask those questions. So it was more of an informal meeting when we did the synchronous learning, but it did give an opportunity for us to do the experiments together. So from that, we after we did our summer academy, we went on, and to end up that academy, they got to present their work. But from that, we went on to transition to Saturday Academy. Saturday Academy is a program that we started fall of 2019 that unfortunately was cut short due to COVID, but we want to continue it on this fall for this academic year. And so we went again from wired to wireless. And so with the Saturday Academy, we looked at different things that the students interest them. So this year we're touching on general geosciences with the different areas of environmental science. We're all gone through and talked about financial literacy, because we know everyone needs the basics of budgeting, things like that. And it's never too early to learn for that. And then we're looking at three scientists. And the one cool thing about geosciences, which is my field that I'm in, is that I also got to learn about scientists that I had no clue that were part of the field. So we had Marguerite Williams, who was the first African-American PhD in geoscience. We have Matt Gibson Jr., which was the first African-American male in geosciences. And then we have Randolph Brommery, who's also a PhD in geosciences, but he went on to be the first African-American male that was the president of the Geological Society of America. And so we pick these people to let them know that, hey, there are people out there that look like you that are in these fields. And with that, it gave the opportunity for me to share my story, because I didn't even know this field existed until I joined it. And I connected it because the different backgrounds I had in the different other scientific fields. So it was good to show that. And so they actually start out the fall talking about rocks and minerals. We've talked about natural disasters. We've talked about weathering. There's just a few things that we've done so far. With financial literacy, we've talked about the basics of budgeting and what goes into financial literacy. And we've also tied in other aspects of math, because when we do have our sessions, we meet every other weekend for 1 hour on a Saturday. And they're able to ask us different questions if they're also having trouble in school, because we do recognize the fact that the students are not in a traditional classroom. So therefore, they're going to have questions that they might not be able to ask their instructor. So we've spent quite a bit of time this fall talking about factors and multiples, because students were slightly confused about that. So we've had different practices with that. We've played games with that. The students have had fun. As I mentioned, we do things in the chat and things like that. So they have a friendly competition with each other in their learning, which we enjoy and have fun on a bi-weekly basis. And I will move this on to Lazarius.
Good morning, everyone. So as Denisha shared, my name is Lazarius Miller, and I am the Research and Evaluation Assistant for the Lewis Walker Institute. So a little bit about, what I'm presenting here is a logic model that I and a classmate developed during our evaluation practicum in spring of 2020. This is specifically catered towards the Saturday Math and Science Academy, but we used it to help us guide how we were going to evaluate effectiveness for the summer camp, the summer Math and Science camp, as well as the current Saturday Academy. And so, thank you. So just a very quick overview. We have activities which compose of math literacy and skill building, as well as science literacy and skill building, and then the research symposium, which also highlights a couple of short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and long-term outcomes, as well as the ultimate outcomes, in which we hope that students will enroll at a post-secondary institution at some point, and then they will persist in STEM-focused degrees as a result of their participation in the WIRE program. Next slide. So along with that logic model and the evaluation proposal, we identified several sources of data collection, or 7 data sources, which include monitoring data such as attendance sheets and registration forms, or even baseline student achievement data, which can include student report cards, test scores, and even national student assessments. Looking at content analysis and specifically student research posters or any portfolios and instructional materials that can be used to capture what our students are learning. Site visits, of course, we can't do those at the moment in a traditional sense, but specifically looking at how can we use parent focus groups or even student engagement surveys, as well as even observing the virtual check-in sessions. Assessment includes any applied concept assessments, or specifically the Imagine Math achievement data. And finally, surveys, which include parent satisfaction surveys, program instructor perception surveys, school teacher, student engagement, and alumni surveys, which would be something that is enacted a little bit later on. So a overview of synchronous attendance. We see the 5 weeks of the program. Over time, you can look at our week 2 and week 3, we had the highest participation for both elementary and middle school students. And then it dropped down and picked back up a little in week 5. And so we don't know how much our students engaged outside of the synchronous attendance, but anytime they were there, we appreciated engaged with them. So this is a graph depicting asynchronous versus synchronous attendance over 5 weeks. And so, as I said, we couldn't necessarily specify how to track asynchronous engagement. And so we are assuming that our students who were not present at the synchronous times, they were actively engaged asynchronously. And so here are our trends. So the parent satisfaction survey went out at the midpoint of this semester, and we got some responses. And so parent satisfaction with program services, we have overwhelming support or satisfaction with the program supply distribution over summer, communication with parents, with students, the WIRE program website, as well as the virtual learning experience and the end of program symposium. The parent perceptions of their students' progress during WIRE Summer 2020 camp, so going down the list, we have overwhelming, strongly agree or somewhat agree with my students. Science vocabulary has improved. My students' understanding of science concepts has improved. My student math vocabulary has improved with 75% strongly agree. My students' understanding of math concepts has improved. With dropped to about 50% strongly agree or somewhat agree. My student has been exposed to science and math concepts in the real world, which is 100%. My student has developed an understanding of the scientific method, which is also 100%. My student is more aware of academic research available to them with the 75% agree. And then my student is more willing to communicate academic concerns with about 50% somewhat strongly agree. So the next question asks parents to think about their students' growth after WIRE 2020 summer camp. And so the items here are my students' confidence in math and science has increased with parents agreeing at 75%. My student is able to identify different types of scientists or engineers at 100%. My student can identify scientists and engineers from different social backgrounds at 100%. My students' interest in pursuing a career or activities related to science or math has increased, which had about a 25% agree rate. And then my student has a reduced fear or anxiety when engaging with math and science. And I would like to point out that for the areas that we got 100%, some of them that we had 75%, were really aligned with the things that we wanted to accomplish this summer, which exposing our students to diverse, with scientists and engineers from diverse backgrounds, getting them exposed to the scientific method, as well as increasing their experience with science and math concepts and improving literacy. And so preliminarily, we can say that things are working. They're working. And we are looking forward to seeing how much more information we can collect over the school year that can help us inform how to better serve our students later on.
All right, thank you so much, Lazarius. And so now we're going to get ready to address our next steps. And when we think about some of our next steps, I mean, we really are going to look at some of those reflection points that have come out. But before we move on, I just want for you to understand that part of what we're finding, and even in our conversations with school leaders and just in some of us, our experiences being parents during this day and age, is that a lot of what we're experiencing with our WIRE Summer Science and Math program in terms of engagement is very consistent with what we're also seeing across some of our districts. And Dr. Gus is going to get to this in more detail, but for some of our families, if they were highly engaged, then they tended to remain highly engaged. If they struggled with levels of engagement, then we still are trying to promote ways, and we've had to kind of redefine how we engage with families to make sure that their needs are being met, because typically there was a reason why families weren't as engaged as they'd like to be, or as we would have liked for them to have been. And then also, as when we look at some of the data that Lazarius shared, I also want to let you know that a lot of times, if we didn't get 100% or 75% in those responses, a lot of times we would get those like the middle ground, like, you know, neither agree nor disagree. So it wasn't so much that people were disagreeing with progress or thinking that harm was being done, but it wasn't necessarily seeing an overwhelming growth in a certain direction. So I just wanted to highlight those realities, so that way we can kind of also better understand what some of those numbers meant. And so now we'll move forward into some of our instructor reflections.
So few of my reflections I've noticed this past summer is that I looked at it as challenges and successes. And some of the challenges were creating a space conducive for virtual learning and finding ways to disseminate that information and student engagement. And one of those things that I came up with, and then Deshaun talked about earlier, was the WIRE website specifically for students. It gave them a space to get the information they needed. And from there, we were able to use platforms like Google Meet, where we could come together and share, and that the students felt comfortable in that space when they were wanted to talk about the information, when we wanted to share information with them. And so different ways we came to disseminate the information was creating buckets for them, in essence. So what we did is that we took all the materials that they needed for the whole entire summer, because that was one of our concerns. How are they going to get this? Are they able to get these materials? How readily accessible are they to these materials? So we created buckets. So the first bucket consisted of their dirt for their urban garden, their plants, their materials for all of the experiments having to do with George Washington Carver, and all. They got packets of information for worksheets, just in case they didn't have access to the internet for Imagine Math. They were still able to touch on the math concepts that we wanted them to focus on. And we did that twice. So we did it for when we talked about George Washington Carver at the beginning, and then we did it again when we switched over to Katherine Johnson with mathematics and space. And again, it was hard to say with the synchronous versus synchronous. We actually saw the students in the synchronous pathway. So we saw about half of them that engaged with us via online. And with asynchronous, it's a little bit harder. We had a couple people who shared the different things. And I noticed that when we did pick up materials at the end, we did have other students who did it on their own. They just didn't interact with us as much. So with that being said, the challenges that my successes were the weekly check-ins. So we wanted to see a student engagement. So we did see some student engagement, and then we had the student participation, which we enjoyed. And then at the end of the summer, we created a student summer showcase. When we were together wired, we had a symposium where we had the students, they were in pairs, and they put together posters, whether it was experiments or we were talking about different concepts in chemistry, because we did water chemistry and basic chemistry last summer. They were able to show that. And so we're like, how are we going to do it this time? So we did like porch presentations where we still social distance. We went out there to the student. They presented their work to us, whether it was a poster on George Washington Carver or Katherine Johnson, or they could send us videos of them doing different experiments that we did throughout the summer, and they did it again. We had one student do water filtration experiment where she showed us the setup and then actual experiment. We had a student who did a hot pepper test because that was his plant that he had in his urban garden. So he sent us video of him trying the hot pepper. He's like, I don't like hot stuff, but I wanted to see how it was going to go. And so he tried the hot pepper. He made sure he had his milk right there with him. But he did give us video on how it interacted, where he talked about his garden and he talked about his hot pepper challenge. We had people who sent us videos of creating new art with spices. So that was one thing that we got to see that wasn't a success when we were worried about how they're going to engage. They were able to show us their progress and what they did. So I consider those successes. Over to you, Ms. Bottoms.
Some of the challenges that I saw doing things remotely, I was tracking task or activity completion. So we created all these materials, all these worksheets and things, but there was really no way of getting them back or seeing whether, you know, students did them. But not also that, like when it comes to math, you know, there's such thing as partial credit, or, you know, getting maybe just a piece of the problem wrong. And I don't know, that I think as a teacher that helps you identify some of the little mistakes that students could be making and not knowing they're making. So you kind of miss that piece of things. Collecting ongoing student feedback. So we a lot of times with those math activities, we had reflection questions at the end of like, how challenging was that assignment? What do you think would have helped you do better on the assignment? Like what materials? Did you need a calculator? Did you need scratch paper? Things like that. Did you need a little bit more explanation? Did you want a video with it? So again, if those are attached to those worksheets that we didn't get back, and some of them we did get back like the very end, but it was again that ongoing feedback that was a little bit challenging. And then also getting to know students. So being online with some of the students versus being in class with all of the students is completely different. Getting to put names with faces and just learning about the students is a fun part of teaching. So it was a little bit harder doing that remotely. Some of the successes were the instructional materials and activities, coming up with the lab notebook and all the materials, getting them videos involved, getting on the website. Like I think we did a really, really great job of doing that. The students seemed to enjoy all the hands-on activities that we came up with. They liked doing them. And actually getting the materials out in our biweekly deliveries was pretty successful as well. And then also incorporating synchronous and asynchronous instruction. I think we did a really good job of that. Having, you know, a group of students that always met on live, and then also those students who were participating at the end. And we got to see that with the showcase, when you had those students who didn't really show up on live, but they still submitted a project at the end to show that, yeah, we did some stuff too. We learned some great things. So I enjoyed the student showcase a lot. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Griffey and Ms. Bottoms. Really appreciate hearing from your reflections. And now we'll toss it over to Dr. Gus, who will share with us some of the parent reflections.
What has been interesting with the parents is the parents are very appreciative of the fact that we make personal phone calls to check up on the students during the week to see how they're progressing, to find out if there's anything we can do to support them. And what the parents have been sharing is part of their frustration, especially with those parents who have special needs children, as the day wanes, the children's energy level drops. And so it's like, how do I keep my child engaged in math and science and other activities? And it's now getting close to time where they need to be taking a shower, getting ready for bed. And they appreciate the fact then that, you know, we get a call, we give them a little encouragement to say, hey, continue. Another thing that we've had several parents who came down with COVID, and their children then, of course, had to be isolated. And the children were very concerned that they were not going to be able to keep up with what we were doing with the Wired program. And so I had to reassure the parents that the first thing was to get healthy, make sure that their child was healthy. The program would be here, and once they had completed what the doctor said, we would be here and we would be in support of them. So they weren't worried about getting kicked out of the program or anything like that. we wanted to make sure that they were still part of the program. That was huge. We had another parent going through a divorce and needing support, and the children needing support. So we shared some resources at the university professionally that would be able to assist the parents and to assist their children. And then the children still would be able to continue to work along in the program. Um, Parents said that their children look forward to competing in the math. So part of our little motivation as well was to create an incentive program for those students who had been working hard in Imagine Math and participating on Saturdays. We gave them gift certificates from Target, $25 for basically student of the month. The parents said it was like Christmas for the kids. They loved it because the kids were able to spend the money on whatever they wanted. Of course, we were encouraging them to spend it on school supplies, but it was their money, and they felt like they had earned it. So they were really looking forward to, can I win again? You know, can I do this again? And I'm the first, and who's going to be second? So the students are going in on Imagine Math, for example, and looking to see where they are in terms of completing their assignments. Who's first, who's second, who's third, and what additional support they need. So the parents are pleased in that regard. Again, from the interaction with the instructors, getting materials to them and being able to share, from getting calls and just checking on the kids and encouraging the kids to participate. And then also for sharing with parents and telling them that we're here if there are some additional resources that they may need or support from the university community that we can assist them with. They have been very appreciative of that. So those are my thoughts, my reflections from what the parents have been sharing with me. They've enjoyed this aspect of the program, and they are looking forward to us continuing the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gus. That is helpful to have some of those qualitative reflections on what our parents have been seeing and experiencing as it relates to their children's engagement in our programming. And our final slide is for Dr. Gus as well. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our community partners.
Well, a couple. One of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we integrated the Wire Math and Science Academy into the full university. So as you talk about next steps, we want people at the university and in the community, when they think about math and science programs, we want our program to be right at the top. And so what we did, we purposely designed a program to get the assistance of the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. That allows us to get full access to all of the resources of the College of Engineering. When our students get an opportunity to go out there, attend the lecture, walk through all of the different phases of engineering, it was just amazing. And to see how they can take these different sciences and turn them into jobs and into careers, amazing. So that gave us an opportunity to integrate our program fully into the university. That has been a huge success. The College of Aviation, again, the College of Aviation, from a couple standpoints, not only are they teaching students about learning how to fly, but they're talking about careers in aviation. As a university that has an aviation college, it only made sense for us, because we're talking about math and science, to participate in the College of Aviation, which also means that we're also going to be participating with a college out in Portland, Oregon, who has a aviation college and a math and science camp like we do. So we've been talking with them. Chemistry. Actually, chemistry was one of the first colleges or first departments to open up the facility to us. For 5-6 summers, they gave us their facilities, let us use them at no charge. We had full access to a lab. The labs at the university, in some cases, had more equipment and supplies than the labs in the high schools. So our children were being taught safety, they were taught instruction, and they were using real materials in real life in real time. That was huge. The Institute of Food Technology, that's been important because as we transition in the future, how are we going to survive in this economy? We're looking at the world shrinking. We're looking at energy, and what does that do for our food? So working with these folks in Chicago and with the Kellogg Company, the Kellogg Foundation, that has been huge. That's in terms of having partners who can come over and talk to our kids as scientists and let them see there are scientists who look like you, who started out like you, whose greatest accomplishment early was just playing in dirt and cattails. And they have become world-renowned scientists, and they've been very supportive of us, saying that we need to partner more with some local members of their society. The Michigan Department of Transportation was also very, very good and very useful for us because they had a bridge building contest. So we taught our students how to make different bridges, how to construct the bridges, what were the materials used, what were the points of access when there was too much weight on a given point and that would break the bridge. How do you construct a bridge? How do you work as a team? Why did you choose this design against another? And there were people from all over Michigan and Wisconsin competing in Grand Rapids over these bridge building contests. So the Michigan Department of Transportation came down and provided us, the Math and Science Center, with additional materials and resources, and said they were available to come and continue to work with us. We also, that ties into Jack and Jill of America. Jack and Jill gave us an opportunity to bring not only students from the Kalamazoo area, but from the Midwest region of Jack and Jill to Western Michigan University, and to participate in our Math and Science Academy, and to participate with the Michigan Department of Transportation as well. So we not only expose our students, but we expose students regionally. When I say regionally, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan to what we were doing, and Indiana to what we were doing. So hopefully we will get those students at some point to come and commit to Western Michigan University. I know, I don't know if I should say that personally, but yes, we do eventually want students to come to the university, and we want them to become future math and scientists. And I guess I'll end with this, what George Washington Carver says, Dr. Carver says, if it's almost right, it's still wrong. So he says in terms of math, it's got to be right. It's got to be right. There's one answer. You may get it in different methodologies. There may be different ways to get there. But he says if it's almost right, it's still wrong. So our partnerships we're looking forward to expanding them, and we're looking forward to furthering develop the existing partnerships that we have. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you
Wallace.
so much, Dr. Gus. What we'd like to do now is open up the floor to questions, to comments. Part of what we really have been focusing on, part of the mission of Lewis Walker Institute, is to build more equitable and inclusive communities. And so the work that we're doing with our WIRE Summer Science and Math program really is designed to promote those opportunities. And so I just encourage you to let's have a conversation now. We have a few minutes left. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll open up the floor.
Dr. Wallace, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that participated. But yeah, a couple comments. One is that the activities that you all shared, great activities. And the idea, I love the idea of the urban garden. We do have to end at 9:45, so we will be conscientious of that. But yes, let's please jump in with questions if you have them. How much of a challenge was it to integrate something as hands-on as an urban garden into virtual learning?
Ms. Griffey, Ms. Bottoms, you want to take that?
I'll go ahead and jump in. It was kind of challenging a little bit because you're taking an urban garden, something that most of them have not done before. And so the goal was that when we provided them that everything they were doing, that we also provide them with different resources. And so what we did is that with our website, it was a whole page dedicated to the urban garden. So it showed them all the parts that go into making an urban garden. And I also had links to different videos that showed how to actually prepare your urban garden. What are some different techniques you can do? Because there was, with us being virtually, we wasn't there to physically show them. So my goal was to actually provide them with the resources that they needed to succeed in building their urban garden.
I have to also add that one of the things that I think was so powerful about the way that Ms. Griffey and Ms. Bottoms really designed the programming was that for the most part, the students could read the directions and follow the directions independently. So they were not necessarily codependent upon their parents or an older sibling to have to figure things out. And if something was more complicated, then that's when they utilize that synchronous meeting time to go over things so that they could either do it together or they could model it and then allow the students to participate in those activities later on. And that's one of the things that we really, really were intentional about in our planning. And we know that that has been a frustration point for a lot of parents saying, hey, you're asking me to give my children or to teach my children at home. And sometimes I don't know what it is that I'm teaching them. How can I be successful? And so we wanted to make sure that everyone was successful, knowing that this was a very stressful time. That's why we also wanted to make sure that we provided all of the materials. So if you think about some of those high-end science kits that a lot of families were, or math kits that are experience kits in general that families were investing in over the summer, we wanted to remove the barrier of financial burden to make sure that we provided every supply. So we really did dedicate ourselves to, writing grants and having support partners that would provide us with those opportunities to make sure that we could provide everything that was needed in order for our students to be successful, and to also take a load off of some of their parents. Because again, parents were struggling in the summertime, school was out, what do I do? And even in the Saturday Academy, something similar. Tony?
Dr. Wallace, a comment. As a music teacher, I've found studying music can lead to other areas. And then the last question, did the parents feel like they were capable of helping from home, or did they have technical challenges they needed to overcome first?
That's a great question. For the most part, our parents actually did have access to the technologies that were needed. Like most of our families, I think we had one family that did not have access to the technology, but that was when they were allowed and they were provided with the opportunity to get support asynchronously, so they could still complete all the assignments and those activities that were provided. I think what we're finding is we were trying to make sure that even the resources that we were using that were online or that were virtual were easily accessible on a cell phone, a tablet, a computer. So that way it wasn't codependent upon technology in order to be successful.
So once again, I just want to thank everybody that participated as part of the panel, Dr. Wallace and your team. And I want to thank everyone who attended today's session. So this session is coming to an end, but I encourage you to take a 15-minute break, and the next session actually starts at 10. So have a wonderful day, and we'll see you a little bit later. Thank you guys again.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.